All right, this is take two. We should be live now, and we're going to talk about what makes a great podcast guest. And we have two BirdTrack certified consultants here. We have Matt B. Davis and we have Paula Jenkins. And Matt, I don't know if Matt is here. Matt, I may have to hide you if I can't hear you at the moment. So, Matt, if you come back, let me know, and I will bring you back up on screen. But while we are waiting for Matt, Paula, let's just get started. So what makes a great podcast guest?
Such a good question. And I feel like it's such a it's a good, there's so much depth to this question, because I feel like there's been more and more people pitching to be on shows recently, and so I think it's great that we're talking about it, especially from like the podcaster side of things. I think the best guests are probably those that are authentically engaged and want to be there to have a great conversation. And that would mean that they're not there just to sell stuff. They're not there just because of your possible reach. They're not there for self-centered reasons. Let's be honest. And I think those are the best guests.
You know, it's interesting. You and I always have like a little bit of a disagreement here.
Yeah.
I mean, we agree, right? We agree about all of it. But having said that, I don't mind a guest who is there for their own reasons. Like if somebody has a book that's coming out and they want to promote their book, I think that's great. On Spartan Up, we had Sebastian Junger on, and that was like a great guest. Yeah. It was somebody we were really excited to have on the show. And he was on the show because he has a new book and he's doing his book tour. Now, he didn't spend the entire interview saying, as I said in my book, and the worst are the people who say, every question, the answer is, well, you can read about it in my book. How do you learn how to tie your shoes? Well, there's a whole chapter on that in my book. Yeah, but how do you do it? Well, we have a special process that I've outlined in my book. Okay, what's the process? Well, there are 4 steps and each one is a chapter in my book. That's not helpful.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what I'm trying to articulate is it's great. And I think that's the part is to kind of recognize that as a guest, you are a guest. I mean, it's like coming over to someone's home, right? Like, and so you try and follow along by what that person does and what they allow in their house, and you try and be gracious, and sure, you talk about yourself because that's why you're there. This kind of drops off the guest analogy in someone's home, but like, I think the important thing is to kind of understand the audience and understand what your host is and what they are about, and to be there to truly be of service, not to be there to try and just sell. And I think what you're articulating is a better way of saying what I feel as well, which is, if I ask you a question about how do I tie my shoes, well, either just give me the short answer or a teaser answer, which is always okay. Or I don't know. Show me. I don't know exactly what it is.
Demonstrate. Oh, yeah. So let's actually get into, it's one of the things, and Matt, who was on for a little bit, and I think he had to drive his car, so he may have chosen safety over conversation, but he is BirdTrack certified. So the question is that he and I have talked about is this, how do you find guests, right? Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of services out there to help podcasters find guests. And to paraphrase for Matt, he kind of says, like, if you don't have guests in mind, why do you have a podcast? What do you think of that?
Well, I totally agree. I mean, when I've led my podcasting boot camp, like I say in my book, no, I'm kidding. When I lead that, one of the things that I encourage people to do is literally mind map out content. And some of those would be topics that are related to your show. And this ties into guests because I also encourage people to think of, like, who do you know in your network, even if they aren't like immediate friends or first connections, but who do you know of when you think of a certain topic that you want to talk about on your show that you want to invite? Because I think those kinds of conversations, especially when you're first starting out, are a lot more fruitful, right? Because you're going to treat that person with the utmost care. They're interested in talking to you because they know you or they know someone you know. And that's how I recommend finding your first guests. And then I think finding guests, you gotta, as a host, I think it's important to do some of your own legwork. Um, I have a story about that from my first season. I did all my own legwork. I don't think I accepted or I even got pitched a single person because I was an unknown. By my second season, I got a lot of pitches from both individuals who wanted to be on Jumpstart Your Joy or from some of the groups. Sorry, some of the, there's a lot of interview matching services, which we can talk about. I know we'll talk about in a minute. And I just was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. And I started saying yes to almost all of them. Listenership went down. My interest in the topic tanked. The second season, the sophomore season, I mean, it's good and I stand by it, but it was a very different experience. And by the third season, and my seasons are a full year long, so that's a little bit crazy too. But I think it was super important for me to start to take back the role of the curator.
Yes.
Which is how I see that, instead of just saying yes because it's easy. I get that it is not always easy to find a guest that fits a specific niche and have them be available to talk to you kind of in the time frame you're hoping to. So I don't know if that answers your question about, I think it does, about how do I think I should find a guest?
Yeah, one of the things that I've started to do, I get pitches, and this is my new favorite technique. And by the way, if you're listening to this, if you're watching us, and if you're interested more in the podcaster side, how do you choose guests? How do you make sure you get the most out of guests? Is it true that certain guests will help you grow your audience? If you have any questions about that, please put them in the comments, because we really like to be interactive. That's what makes this really fun for us. And but if you have guest questions too, if you're someone who is looking to be a guest on more podcasts and you have questions about how to get invited or how to get invited back or how to pitch, we can talk about all of that. But my latest technique, when I get a pitch, most of the pitches are not from the actual person, right? Most of the pitches that we get in bulk, especially now, I think, as all these different services and listings are coming out, you're starting to get what feel kind of like spammy pitches from PR services or matching services. There's some really good ones and there's some that are not so good. But my current technique, whenever I get a pitch, is I definitely look at it, because sometimes it's a great guest. But what I also do, if it's not a great guest, is I will take the time to reply to the person that sent it. I will thank them for their interest, and I'll tell them what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Because it's a wide sea out there. And if you can be clear about what makes a great guest for your show, and you can create an ally with these PR services or interview matching services, it can actually be really helpful. And we have gotten, both on my personal show and on the show I produce for Spartan, we've gotten some great guests from some of these outreaches. Sometimes what happens is they send an outreach because the book is coming out, and then 6 months later, we actually reach back out and say, hey, this person would be a good fit. And sometimes that doesn't work out. But what's the first thing that you do if it's a cold inquiry? Like, so there's the guest that you find, right? And if you care about your topic, it's not that hard in a way. Like, I care about my topic for Grounded Content, which is content creation, content marketing. It's something I am really genuinely excited and curious about. So I'm reading articles on LinkedIn, on Medium. I'm listening to podcasts. If I go to Clubhouse, I'm listening to chats about that. I'm reading, trade publications. And so I'm always seeing people who are saying things that are interesting. And if they say something that's really interesting, a lot of the time I'll reach out and say, hey, I read this article. It was really interesting. Would you be interested in being on my show? So that's one of the ways I do it when I'm looking for people. When you get a cold inquiry, how do you screen them?
Well, generally, I do read whatever the one sheet is that's sent, because generally these groups will send you a PDF.
Do you actually read it, or do you? Because
I open it. It's not always that helpful, but what I'm looking for there is the links. Like, can I get to that person's website, their Instagram, and maybe LinkedIn? It kind of depends on who they are and what their focus is. I will admit that I have taken to looking at Instagram to seeing, not because I always want the promotion, but to see if they're talking about anything besides themselves. And what I've found is that lots of times, or just to see if their Instagram is still live, like, and still active, because
Right.
I
Right.
want to see somebody who's still in front of people. And also to see, have they done a ton of interviews recently? And sometimes it makes a difference, because sometimes I will pick them if they have, and sometimes I will not pick them because they have. Because there's this kind of subtle balance as a host, that, yeah, it's great to have somebody that everyone wants to talk to on your show, but there is a diminishing returns. If they're on a PR stint right now, well, then they've probably said just about everything they're going to say. And so then maybe I still want them, but then I'm going to want to ask them very different questions than maybe the questions they've been asked everywhere else. So I do take a look, and I'm kind of sussing out, is this somebody that's going to have a great conversation? What other shows have they've been on? I also do look when those kind of cold pitches come through to see, is this just a spam cut and paste thing?
Mm.
Um, and has there been any care, honestly, in taking it? Because I have a show about joy. So if you're telling me that they just want to talk about how to make more money, I don't know. It's not that interesting. Like, sure, I could talk about it, but I also do have a list of topics that I don't talk about. So I kind of bounce it up against that as well.
That's so interesting. Yeah, for me, it's really like I don't care that much whether it's a bulk mail or a cut and paste job, but what I care is whether I want the person. I don't
Yes.
care that much if they want me. I care if I want them, you
Yeah.
know? So if they went to tremendous effort or they did now, if somebody really goes to great effort, I probably will take a closer look for sure. Right.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, one of the things that I really like to do is I like to go to Apple Podcasts and I like to search under their name. And I
Yeah.
like to see if they've been a guest on other podcasts. And I will listen to those. And I'll listen to them because I just want to see kind of how they think on their feet and what their personality and their vibe and just kind of who they are when they are not in presentation mode. And that just
Mhm.
helps me to get a sense of whether the chemistry will be good as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I do listen either before I say yes or before I have someone on. I always listen to a couple of interviews with them, because I don't, this might be really wacky, but I like to hear their cadence, and I like to
Mm,
hear how they speak. Um, I feel like that gets me ready, like it preps me. So I kind of know how they pause, and it's all subconscious. I'm not like making notes or anything, but I feel like I know better what to expect of someone once I've heard them speak a little bit. And you can tell, like, is this a rehearsed, like, I have 5 points I'm going to talk about? Or is it that, like, they're just having a conversation with people? Yeah, I have to hear them. It's funny.
yeah. Well, how much of that is, I mean, I think that whether they hit the 5 points or whether it's a natural conversation, a lot of that is on the host, right?
Yeah, you think so?
I do. I do. Now, the host can't control if the person answers every question by telling you to read the book, but the
Yes.
host can control. So let me ask you this: what do you do when you get on the phone with a guest and you're about to start? Do you prep them in a certain way? What do you tell your guests?
Oh yeah. So I mean, it starts before that conversation even starts, where I have a whole set of automated things that, like, here's what to expect, here's how to log it. Like, usually I also still send some batch questions, like, sorry, some draft questions to them.
Oh, you
And
do.
yeah,
And
I'm
are
one
they
of them.
custom?
Yes, they are. I do let them know, because on Jumpstart Your Joy, there's a first question and last question I ask everybody. And so I don't want anyone to feel like
Mm,
surprised. They're not hard. It's what brought you joy as a child, and what are 3 ways you can jumpstart joy. So, but I want them to not feel like, oh, that could kind of grind things to a halt. But so I kind of give them that to begin with. And I do ask the question. This actually comes from the one and only Lewis Howes of School of Greatness. I do ask them either in that email or when I talk to them for the first time, like, is there anything you want to leave out because it's, like, too vulnerable or
mhm,
whatever?
mhm.
Or is there anything you want to make sure you include because you haven't gotten to talk about it? And I feel like that lets them open up a little. Like, it drops the, oh, this is a, like, an
Yeah,
official, kind of thing. I mean, it's official, but I want it to be conversational. And I do say that up front too, is that these are the questions that I think we're going to go through,
yeah,
but I'm pretty organic when I interview. And
right.
so we might go anywhere. And then we do small talk. And that's the warm up, how are you?
do.
What's your day? Doing a lot of interviews, where are you? Like I ask a lot of questions and I get them laughing, and it's all on purpose. I mean, I'm
So
a nice person.
let's talk about the myth, or if it's a myth, that that the right guests are going to build your audience. I mean, in some ways, the right guests can build your audience, but I think it doesn't work the way people think.
No, it doesn't. And there's some research done around this, that the best way to grow a show is social media, word of mouth, and you being on other shows.
Yeah.
And like the fourth or fifth one is having guests. Yeah, I think it's a total myth. I've had some big guests and seen the huge, I'll go up over my screen, but like the huge, download thing that goes on maybe for a couple or 3 weeks. And then after that, I mean, those people were interested in the guest. Exactly. And I'm delightful.
You are delightful.
but they didn't come for me. They came for whomever.
Yeah, and even further, here's what I think. If you have Gary Vaynerchuk on your show, right? And people are not going to go say, what did Gary Vaynerchuk say on Paula's show? If they're a fan of Gary, right? If they're a fan of Paula, they want to know. But if they're a fan of Gary V, they're going to listen to Gary V's show. They're not going to go find your show to hear what he had to say, unless you have a really different take on things. And even then, like you said, it's really going to be about what he says on your show, not about your show. So it's a rare occasion that will grow your show. But the benefit of having somebody like that on, I think, is that it gives you huge credibility, and it gives you can land almost any guest after that. Right. Exactly. Because people are like, oh, Gary Vee was on Paula's show, I'm going to be on that show.
Yeah. So I think when I think about guests, I actually think kind of in broad and narrow. And maybe it's more like broad and niche. Like I actually do try and make it so that some of them are those broad, popular, everybody wants to hear what these folks have to say guests. And then I very mindfully also try and choose a few people that are more niche, meaning a group, like somebody that has a lot to say about joy, or on the other show, a lot to say about podcasting. Like, and I think that helps, because what you're doing is you're casting a net. Like, sure, somebody, the Gary V group might fall in love with my show, and that's awesome. Or it's just the credibility. But then I pull in some people that are, maybe the lady who runs Oh Joy, the brand, or Joy of Missing Out, that author. Like, those are a little more niche. And so those people that already want to talk about joy and listen to something about joy, that might be the thing that pulls in more listens overall in an overarching way. And I also think, I'm going to jump in on this, but like finding guests that are niche to your topic and have not done a lot of interviews. Now they're further and far between at the moment, but those are the ones that will bring in an audience that may stick around, I think, more so than others.
I think there's in my mind, there's three tiers of guests, or three types of guests. I don't even want to call it a hierarchy, but there's three types of guests. One is, the Gary Vee or the Oprah, or the huge names, right?
Yeah.
And they're really not going to grow your audience, because number one, people who want to hear about them go to them, right? Yeah. And number two, they're very unlikely to share it, because they're doing hundreds and hundreds of podcasts and interviews, and they're not going to share it on their media, right? But what they do is they give you credibility, again, and help you land other guests. And then the other end of the spectrum are the guests that are so small that they're super excited to be on your show. They're so enthusiastic. They share it with everyone they know and all their social media, but that's like 8 people, right? So it doesn't really grow your show either. It might be an interesting conversation. There's that middle tier, and this is, I think, what you were talking about, that is like golden. And those are the people that are speak really well to your niche, right? Mm-hmm. Speak really well to this specific area of interest. They have information that's valuable for your audience, and they're not everywhere saying that information, and they're excited to be on the show, so they share it. And this is why I actually, back to that first thing of what do they want? Those kind of guests, I'll even ask them at the beginning of the podcast, like, what would be a win for you? Like, what do you want to happen in this podcast? And that way, like, I know my podcast is not all about pitching my guest product. Like I have a very specific conversation that I want to have on Grounded Content. And we talk about content creation, right? And we talk about marketing and we talk about tactics and we talk about ethics and we talk about philosophy, but it's all about that, right?
Mhm.
And so like whether it's personal branding or your product or your brand, corporate, all those, but it's all about that. And so obviously if somebody says like a win for me would be if we spent the entire hour talking about how I made a birthday cake. Well, that's not going to be a good fit, right?
Yeah.
But if they say, a win for me would be if we could, mention this campaign I just did, or mention, once they know the context of the show, then oftentimes it will cue me into something they're excited to talk about. And if they're excited to talk about it, then it's going to be a much better conversation and they're more likely to share it, which brings us to the next point that you were talking about with me before we started. Like, how do you actually get people to share if they're on your show?
Yeah. And this, tricky. Like, and it's a touchy topic because I will say that I don't actually expect anyone to share. And I think that's interesting because I think there's a lot of podcasters that absolutely expect and even will write in a little questionnaire, do you agree to share this episode? Which
That's
I feel
fine
gets
if
into like,
you don't want good guests.
yes.
I mean, if you'll only take guests that agree to that, then you're limiting who's going to be on your show. Like who?
Yeah. So I think the best way to approach it is to be clear. Like, as Brene Brown liked to say, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So be clear that you appreciate, that's the word I try and use, that I would really appreciate a share. And when my episodes go live, and I will admit that I wasn't so good at this at the end of my last season, but when something goes live, it's the perfect time to send that thank you email and the link to the episode along with any imagery you're making to share, because the easier you make it for each person that's been on to share, the more likely they are to download those images and just either send them their social media person or however they run things, do it
I
for
almost feel like
themselves.
it's just courtesy. Like
Yeah.
if you were interviewed on a show, wouldn't you want to know like when it was going to air? Wouldn't you want a link to it so you could check it out and know that it was live?
Promote it?
Yeah. I mean,
I
even
spent
if you
an
don't
hour
want
with
to
the
promote
person.
it. Right, exactly. At least you just want to know. It's like basic courtesy, right?
Yeah.
So
and it's so funny because I was a guest on a podcast that as I looked on LinkedIn to promote this, I saw the person from years ago is now rerunning it. They're like, check out Paula Jenkins. And I'm like, why didn't you just tell me you're rerunning this?
right.
I'd be
It's nice
happy
to know.
Yeah.
And I've done that wrong too. I mean, there's times when I just don't do a good enough outreach post show just because I get my hands full with stuff.
I think that's
that
fair.
does happen.
But I think it's also okay later to follow up and be like, thank you so much. I did run the episode. Here's where it is. If you would love, I'd love to have you promote it. And usually my language is in whatever way feels most authentic to you. And that way it's not like, share this now.
Another potential Bird Tracks member, my friend Rich Cardona, he's a podcaster, and he had me on the show, and he sent a really nice, like, after we were interviewed, he sent like, here's some stuff, use any of it you want. So he sent links and he made videos that made me look good, right?
Yeah.
So that I was like, oh, this is great. I want to look good. And that's a nice courtesy. I think I shared, I think he sent 3 of them and I think I maybe used one of them, but what do you have kind of like a playbook that you use for your post interview follow-up?
Yeah, it's just that, it's that email. And on social, I'm not as great at it this year, but this year has been so weird. Usually there's what I call a face card. I don't know if anybody else calls it that, but it's the picture of the person. It says what the episode title is, where you can find it. Like that's the first image. And then the other image, I usually do a quote card again, with a quote that makes the person look great. Like I want it to be something really shareable, really positive. It's not controversial. And then I share both of those ahead of time. If they put them out of order, I don't even care. Just if they're sharing, and I tag everybody. If they're on the medium that I've posted on, I'm tagging, and
Yeah.
so they see it. I know they can't not see it. Like, and that's across, I do Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And sometimes I'll even do pins. But that you can't tag people in. So, and I think
So
what you said though is like so important is I think you're more likely to get a share as well if you're really careful and edit people in a way that makes them look outstanding, because
of
nobody
course.
wants to share the show if all you've done is like, or the promo copy you're using is like, hear how Paula Jenkins says, she doesn't like this. And you're like, why would I share that? I get that might get you more clicks, but like let's treat each other
Chris
nice.
Brogan, he challenged me on when I had him on the show the second time, he challenged me to say, like, on today's show, I have a really unspectacular and bland guest, Chris Brogan. He's like, do you say every time I have an exciting and interesting guest? I'm like, I might, but that's because I'm excited and interested. He's like, I challenge you to say, like, on today's show is a very, run of the mill guest.
I can go with that. But if it goes to the Geraldo end of the spectrum, like, no, like, let's make everybody look good. I mean, what you choose to share is gonna also.
Well, here's back to our no blueprint, right? I mean, it really depends on the type of show. Obviously, if your show is Jumpstart Your Joy, you are not like doing attack, sabotage journalism, right?
No.
But if you do have a show like that, that's okay. That's a different style. Then certainly you're not going to expect your guests to share it, but you probably will get some viral shares from some other stuff.
Yeah, true.
So we have had a real dearth. Is dearth the right word? Does that mean we didn't get a dearth of comments? Or does that mean we had a lot?
A lull?
Listening, and you know what dearth means. Please comment and let us know.
One thing we didn't talk about was, how do you say no when somebody pitches?
So, Paula, when somebody pitches you, how do you say no?
I mean, because I do try and look at absolutely every one of them. And I do try and send them a no thank you, which is usually thank you so much. If it is a topic that I know I don't talk about. So if it's finance, there's other ones, body image, I don't talk about that. So I will let them know, like, this just isn't one of the topics that I talk about. It's just so they know. So it's not about them at all, even if they were, but then, there might be a few.
We got, thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
So we have had
Heather.
We have had a dearth of comments today until Heather came to our rescue. Thank you, Heather. So grateful.
And she'll get this one. And good day to you, Heather. That's a common greeting for the group we're a part of. So thank you for clarifying. But yeah, I think part of it is that it's good to let people. I don't have a podcast. Oh, yes. Well, and we can talk, Heather, we can talk about how to be a great guest in a future one. That might be a fun one. But I think letting people know why, so they don't just feel like it's them. And I have had people write back and say, well, you know what? I don't have to talk about that, but I did find joy in this thing. And I have reconsidered people, because I think that's fair too. I think it's slightly different when it's a group or a rep, someone that you have a relationship with. I do also try and let them know why, but I also want to be very careful with them, because the relationship that I've built with some of these folks is years long at this point. And so telling them thank you and like, hey, maybe remembering like, thank you so much the last time you gave me you gave me a lead. And with them, sometimes I even will say, have you thought about this show? Would you like an introduction? Because at this point, I know
that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Kind of like continuing the goodwill of it is important.
Well, because you want those resources to bring you great guests, and you want to have positive relationships. What I tend to say these days is it's not a good fit right now, or it's not something we have room for in our schedule right now. And if it's somebody that really could be a good guest, but we really don't have room in the schedule right now, I will ask them to check back. And then it kind of puts it on them if they're sort of have the energy. And sometimes I will check back. But I will also, I think we talked about this, I will explain what we're looking for in guests. And so, even to the point of with one of my shows, we had an issue where like knows like. And so we were not getting the diversity that I wanted in the show in guests. And I think it's sort of a self-fulfilling thing, so that PR agents or interview agents, those kind of people would see the kind of guests we had and send us more of those. And so a lot of the time I will even reply and say, this is the kind of guest we're looking for in terms of topic and knowledge. And I'll say, but especially I'm really looking to expand the types of voices we're hearing from. If you have anybody that, it comes from a different perspective on this specific subject, has expertise, I would love to hear from them.
Yeah.
So that's something that I have been doing lately. And I think a lot of the services, they're some of them are bots, but most of them are people too. And they tend to appreciate the response.
Yeah. Another thing along those lines from the podcaster side of it is there are a couple of groups that I have, like I said, long-standing relationships with. And from time to time, I will look on their roster because you can wait for the inbound, right? The inbound pitch for yourself. But I did notice that one of these groups had Sonya Renee Taylor coming up, and I was like, oh, like I'm getting goosebumps now. Like ideal, like oh my gosh. So I put an outbound pitch to this group before.
Now explain to me what you mean by groups. What are these groups? These are like professional organizations or
so this one specifically represents authors and helps them with their PR when they have a book launch. And I don't even remember the first one they sent me, but they have sent me so many good authors. And I am so careful with them because I love them and I've gotten to know them, meaning the people that work there.
Yeah.
And so I sent in an outbound pitch and said, I see that you have Sonya Renee Taylor on your roster. I would love the opportunity. I would be so honored. And it was completely authentic and completely truthful. And that's how I got that interview is
that's great.
I built the relationship in an authentic way. And then like 5 years later, finally asked for one thing and I love all the guests, but like, it just felt like, oh, maybe they'd let me. And then they did. And so I think looking for that too is if you have the relationship, you could also check in with these people every once in a while. Cause I have another one that represents Fred LeBlanc of Cowboy Mouth, the band. And so he'll send me stuff every once in a while. And sometimes I'll be like, hey, Fred doing anything?
Just in case.
Yeah, I love talking to Fred.
Just as a quick aside to anybody, if you're listening, I'm really curious to know specifically if you're a podcaster or a potential guest. So put it in the comment. Just let us know if you have a podcast or if you appear on podcasts, because I'm really interested to know what brought people to this conversation.
Yeah.
And then
you also go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to ask you a question, but go ahead.
Maybe we're going to ask each other the same question, but about the new trend of guest and monetizing.
Oh, guest facing monetization. Okay. So I always try to be balanced about these things. And so listen, if you have a huge audience and somebody comes to you and they have a book they want to publish and they want access to that audience, like I'm not saying this is in every case a horrible idea, but this concept, which is like growing in popularity right now, and we see it in the podcast chat rooms, we see it in Clubhouse, this idea of what they call guest facing monetization. And first of all, there's two things that make me crazy about it. Number one is this sense of entitlement. So there are these conversations that come up, like with new podcasters where they just don't understand why someone wouldn't pay them to be on their show. Or the thing that is really disturbing is, and oh God. So I had Christy Hausler on Grounded Content, and she was talking about podcast monetization and all the different.
And she's a podcast producer, editor. Like she does things like we do, just for anyone that doesn't know her. She's awesome.
And she has a new show called Podcast Monetization Secrets. So she's really doubling down on helping people who have real podcasts who just have not been able to figure out the money part of it, which is so important, right?
Yeah.
So I had her on the show and she was talking about a lot of the real ways to earn money with your show. And she we talked about guest facing monetization, and she's like, who should I call out? And she called out a specific person who does this thing where they send people these emails and say, like, you'd be a great guest on our show. And it's a business show. And we want to get you all this exposure. And then when you say yes, they send you like the credit card link. Like they reach out to you, make you think that you're going to be like a rock star, right? And then it's like embarrassing and awkward. And then even then they're like, well, we can upgrade you to a special post in this thing for an extra fee of this and blah, blah, blah. So not 2 weeks later, I get a message from my dad. And he's like, have you heard of this podcaster? I just got a weird email from him. And like, just because it had the word podcast in it, my dad's asking me. Yeah. Now he knew, like, he didn't fall for it, but because he was referred by somebody who, whatever. I don't want to put anything out there, name any names, but it was this very guy. It was the exact specific guy. Wow. Now it's funny because we had just been talking about this, and this is old, right? This is an old model. So he was telling me about how he's an attorney and how they used to get the inquiries like, we want to put you in the best lawyers in America guidebook, right? And then you pay like your money. The only people who get copies of the best lawyers in America guidebook are the people that are in it. So you pay to be in it, and then you pay to get a copy of it, and no one in the world sees it. So it's basically that in podcast form, right? It's an old scam.
Yes. I don't even know what to say about that. I feel like there's a different topic. I feel like there's podcasting groups that do this too, where you pay to be on their best of list. And I've seen a couple people saying, oh yeah, I'm on the top of the charts at this. And then when you go over, you're like, what is this fake chart? Like, and it has all, and then if you click through to join us, it shows how you can pay to be on their chart. And it's like, what? Anyway, back to guests. Monetization wise, I think so. This gets into really touchy territory, right? Like, I think there are
sponsorships and all that. Like, it's all kind of
sponsored posts to me in any way. The minute that you are doing a pay to play model, I feel like then it does become transactional. And then, I mean, this is even back from when I was in advertising agencies. The minute it becomes advertorial, meaning advertising and editorial combined, that's that portmanteau. Is that how we say that?
Heather,
but then
can you help us?
Heather Hall, can you help us, please? But the minute it becomes that, it's like, you're right. There's a sense of entitlement. I paid to be on this, so it needs to reflect me in the best light possible. And it also makes it seem like, and then I can talk about whatever thing I'm promoting because I've paid to be on. Like, and I don't like that at all because I really want people just to come on and have an authentic conversation. Here's one place I wonder if the lines have become blurred. And I've seen it a little bit with a couple of guests that became entitled when I was like, I'll explain the whole situation in a second, but is some of these matching agencies. So let's pull back the curtain here. When you reach out to some of these reps, you pay a fee for them to get you on X number of podcasts in a month or 6 month or whatever term. And I don't think it's not cheap. You're paying a good amount of money to have these people match you. I don't know if you're a guest. Do you guys know none of that money comes back to a podcaster? Right. $0. We are not being paid when you contract with an agency to get on my show. I get nothing. I get zip. And I get some attitude. I'm ranting. Everyone look out. I get attitude from people when they're like, but I signed up to be, this was one, and I'm even doing my hand thing, aren't I? I signed up to be on, so we just need to have this interview because we've held time in our schedule. And I'm like, what the fresh hell? Like, I wrote them back and said,
what was that curse word? Can you say that again?
Fresh hell.
Oh, fresh hell. Okay.
What the fresh hell?
Okay. That was a new one for me. I hadn't heard that one.
Bird track certified.
It's the bird track certified curse word.
Yeah. So I wrote them back and I said, I hope you I said, I don't know where this entitlement is coming from. But there's no obligation for me to have you on the show. And I am not receiving any of the monetary things that you have given to the rep. And I let the rep know, like, these people are treating me like I am a transaction. And no, thank you. I never got a reply. They have sent me more people. So thank you to that group. But like, I think you got to understand that from the podcaster side, many of us are doing this without, unless we've got a sponsor or whatever, like, we're not doing this for the money usually.
Now, what do you think if it's not really transactional, but like you build a relationship with a sponsor because they're your
Mm,
sponsor, you build a relationship, you
yeah.
want to help them out. They're not specifically paying to be on the show. How do you feel about that?
I feel like as long as the terms of you're an advertiser, I would love to have you on the show because I value our relationship. And you kind of put that in your intro in some way. So your audience also knows, like, yeah, this is my main sponsor. I wanted to have a conversation because here's why I like them. I think that's a different play. But again, there's that editorial piece of like, I make the decision to say, there is a transactional relationship here. You choose if you think this is a great conversation, but you have to understand what's below the surface of
Right,
what's going on.
right,
I don't what do you
right.
think?
I think it depends, but I think if the content is good, I think that's the key,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I
Yeah.
kind of feel like I think the audience, it's all about the audience. It's
Mhm.
all about the audience. And so if somebody is a great guest and is also paying, I think that's probably fine.
Yeah.
But if they're a crappy guest and they're not paying or they are paying, it's not so good. Like I
Yeah.
think it's all about the quality and I of the show. And I think it's kind of like the whole sort of where the sponsored post and the social media thing started with this idea that, well, if Paula says she likes this and
Yeah.
I trust Paula, it must be good. And then Paula would only promote something that she believed in. I think then the money is less of an issue, but I think it's when, people set aside their own standards for the money. I don't know, if you're listening, this is a really interesting one. I would love to hear what
Mhm.
you think about this idea as we are getting ready to wrap up, I think, because 'cause
Yeah.
we've been chatting for a long time, maybe another, well, let's call it we'll wrap at 4:30. That will be, uh,
Yeah.
that will be good.
Yeah. I think what you've brought up there is probably the most important if you're the podcaster to make sure that you're staying true to yourself and that you're transparent with your audience because really if the relationship you have with your audience goes south, then what do you have? Then you don't have a show. You literally you have no
Yeah.
one
So I
if you
just
don't.
heard, and I don't wanna again, I don't wanna name any names. It's not anyone I work with directly. It's not
Yeah.
anything controversial, but I just heard from a company that's pretty vague that was on a podcast. It's a well-known podcast, um, that people really love, and it is not one of the sort of ones that's known for a pay-to-play show. Um, but this company paid to be on this show. I'm being really, really vague on purpose. Um, but this company said it was well worth it because the sales that came from that conversation. And the thing is that it kind of makes sense, right? Because on the one hand, the
Yeah.
podcast has built this credibility. They interviewed this company about their product and got real knowledge and information. So it was not, they didn't lie about the product or mislead
Right.
about the product. They asked real questions from a genuine place of curiosity and interest about the product. The
Mhm.
product really was a good product. And so people who trusted this person, listened to the show, learned about this product, went and bought it. So to me, it's like that's the perfect world.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And why not? Like, why shouldn't the podcaster be compensated for that service, which is the years of building that audience
Mhm.
and also that really good conversation about the product?
Yeah. Well, and so maybe that side of it too is if you're a guest and you want access and you're willing to pay to make sure that you allow it to be an authentic conversation. I mean, you can
Yes.
if you're paying, yes, then there needs to be some sort of placement, right? Meaning you're talking about your product or your services or whatever it is that you offer. But allowing the host, sorry, to craft a conversation, but also be like it's a co-created thing where this is how I would like to be presented. Let them ask the questions that seem authentic and then allow it to stand on its own because I think the other thing that would make me nervous is if someone tried to come in and say, these are the questions I want you to ask. This is what I will pay you. And this is how I want to be presented. I mean,
and you know, it's funny. I've been a guest on some shows, which I am not paying for, where I almost feel uncomfortable because they're so pitching me. They're like, this is Marian and she's got a great service. And like, where can you find her? So, like the whole show is about my great service. And I'm like, is this interesting to anyone? Like, thank you. But it's almost like it would be, I don't know. I question whether that is interesting to people, you know, when it gets so pitchy.
Yeah. And I question, I've had
think
people
they're trying to help me, but you know.
Yeah. Well, and maybe they are, and maybe it's just it's a nuance thing. Right? Like they're keyed up a little bit on that.
All right. So we have, if we're ending at 4:30, we have 3 minutes left. So first of all, last call for comments and questions. We're wrapping up. We have 3 minutes left. If you want to know something from Paula about like, why did she start a new she has a podcast about podcasting, right?
Joy of podcasting, people
knows about this stuff, right? And I have a podcast about content. So talk about meta. We're both super meta. So if you have questions about all that stuff, ask us. Yep. And if not, we'll just keep ranting.
Right.
You know what I would like to know? Is this only interesting to us? Because we're having a good time, but we could do this privately and then we can like, we don't even have to
really let it rip.
Then we could really let it rip. We can use names. We can name names. We can just let it all out. So if this is not interesting to you, we would have more fun doing this in private. So listen, if let us know. Yeah. Let us know if this is super boring. We did not have our best guest, Gabby, today.
Oh gosh, Gabby, we miss you. I hope you're watching in the replay because you're missed.
Yeah.
And Matt is not here.
Matt, who is certified, and I have to give Matt credit. Matt wanted to be on the call. He had to pick his kids up at school, and he made the correct decision that it was unsafe to be live on LinkedIn while driving his car. And I think that was a fine decision. Thank you, Matt.
We applaud that.
Appreciate that. Yeah. We do applaud that.
Well, and I'd like to think that these conversations are interesting because I know, I mean, maybe it's just to me, but I feel like I don't get to talk about or hear how other podcasters think and act because it is such a solo and siloed activity. I mean, we're often right here doing our own thing on our computer, and so you know that's why I love talking with you, Marian. I find it to be quite enlightening.
I enjoy it, and I think it'll be even better with the third Bird Tracks member, Matt, when he joins us. It's going to be great. If you're listening to the replay and you've made it through the whole thing, do please comment and let us know if there's subjects you want us to talk about. Because I think are we back next week?
I am out next week again, but we could do the following.
I think we can do the following. I might be out the following, but
so let's look at August 12th or 19th.
Yeah. We will let you know. And I guess is that a wrap? Any final
think it's
remarks?
A wrap.
It's a wrap. All right. Let me put up our special. Oh, I don't have a special end slide. I'm going to do that next time. All right. End broadcast.